Before we begin today's episode, I want to let you know that I'll be discussing mental health and suicidal thoughts, and this may be triggering for some listeners. There are resources available in the show notes. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, here we go. I'm Kortney Wilson, and this is episode 1 of my podcast, The Shit Stick of Life. Now, let me start by saying I have done so many things in my life, but the thing that you all should know first and foremost is that I have never been more scared in all of my life than I am at this very moment. Whew, how many seconds am I in? Less than a minute, and I'm already crying. I do believe that I will be a better host than I will be on this solo episode today. So bear with me as my bleeding heart kind of pours itself out to all of you in sharing just exactly why now. So a little bit about myself, because I realize that some people may tune in today who have followed me from, my earliest days in Nashville, Tennessee, or even before that in Canada. And some of you, I hope, are new to my career and hopefully this podcast. So I want to introduce a few people before we start. So Sarah Burke, my producer, is on. Say hi, Sarah.
Hi. You're doing great.
Thank you. She knows how nervous I am today. And then the other person in the room that you can't really, hopefully you can see, actually come over here and say hi, is my assistant, Emma. Emma's more than assistant. There she is. Look at how cute you are. She has been such a blessing to my life the last few months. I needed somebody to sort of step in and help me out. And on her first day, I said, hey, listen, I want to start a podcast. I already know I'm going to do this. It's been on the list for almost 2 years, and I keep pushing it aside, and you're going to help me not push that aside. And sure as the sun would rise, every week she would bring it up to me and say, Court, hey, on that list, podcast, or hey, we need to talk to producers and you need to decide who you're going to go with or whatever. So thank you, Emma. So I moved to Nashville. I grew up, in Canada. I'm the oldest of 4. I was always a singer, always, into country music and dancing and all the things. I did commercials, even Barbie commercials when I was little. So I was kind of like I say now a show pony. I was labeled sort of the singer of my family. And when they said sing, I sang, for better or worse. So at 18, I was very driven. I moved to Nashville. I had nothing. I had $300 to my name and a dream, and that's it. But I was determined that I was going to follow this path. And within a week, I was sitting in an entertainment lawyer's office by a chance meeting with somebody else that I met, and he had me in front of producers, and actually it was Reba McEntire's producer and Narvel, her husband at the time, publishing people. I had never written a thing in my life, and I had a publishing deal put in front of me. So basically a bunch of people sort of grasped onto this new talent and said, hey, we're going to hitch a ride and let's go. It was basically what you call a Cinderella story in Nashville. And I was here for it. I was like, when opportunity meets preparedness, which is what I was, I built this foundation on growing up. I am prepared and this is the opportunity and I'm going to take it. It was that very same week that I met my first husband. His name's Dave. So I was off to the races with my career and I was falling in love. Like, what more could an almost 19-year-old want? I always joke when I tell this story that was the beginning of the end of my music career. Because, I did get a recording deal with Disney, which was Lyric Street was the country label to Disney Records. And I had a really good time. I made a record. I pushed that record. One day I will tell lots of shit stick of life stories about me having a record deal and climbing my way to the top, because Lord knows I have a million, but it's a different episode. So we're going to glance over a lot of parts of my career, but I'm going to give you the bits that count. I got a record deal. A few years later, I asked for a release from my record deal, which was unheard of. So usually you get dropped. I was like, I'm leaving. I'm going somewhere else. I had a few shows to play as part of my contract, one of which was between the towers at the World Trade Center. That was about 5 days before the World Trade Center went down. I was the last act ever to play the World Trade Center with Rascal Flatts. And so the morning of 9/11, when I was getting ready to sign a new record deal with another label. I was just finishing these things while the World Trade Center happened and everybody's lives were changed. And that record exec called me just after the towers went down, about 3 hours after it went down. We were all crying in front of a TV and said, "You know this means I can't sign you." And I said, "Yes, I do." So I was very equipped in my life from a very young age to pivot, is the word that everybody uses now. I was pivoting left and right all the time. But one thing was sure, and that was my relationship with my ex-husband. We proceeded to have a couple of babies because I knew that I wanted to be a mom more than anything. And I'd seen so many artists give up their dreams, like having a family or having kids, for their careers. So I had decided to push forward on the family path, and I loved it. I got another record deal. I had a record deal with my husband. In the end, we started flipping houses because we wanted to support our family. We were not passionate about flipping houses. We just were passionate about putting shoes on our children's feet. That was the means to the end. And that led to us being on TV together. It was a show called Meet the Wilsons where we had our kids on TV and it was sort of reality style on CMT, but that shifted into an HGTV show where we were entirely flipping houses. Like, that's what we were doing. And that show was incredibly hard for us to make. When people say, "Was that show real?" I'm like, realer than real. It nearly broke us. Now, newsflash, we're not married anymore. So if you are new to my story, we divorced 5 years ago. The show was not the reason for the divorce. I'm not blaming HGTV or the show, but we did love each other and we were fighting for our marriage. And then I was fighting for a marriage that he, I think, had already left, is my perspective of that. And I've learned a lot about, staying in any kind of relationships with friends or with spouses or boyfriends or girlfriends when that person's already sort of checked out. But I was fighting. So now I filed for divorce. There were lots of things that were happening behind the scenes, which has been hard for me to talk about. And during these podcast episodes, I'm going to reveal some of it when I'm ready. Now, again, bear with me. The reason I'm terrified is because some of these things are really hard to talk about. And I know you guys are out there right now saying, "Well, if it's so hard, shut the hell up. Don't talk to us." But this isn't entirely about you. This is part of my healing process as well. In fact, in some ways, it's the final part to my healing process. Not that I'm ever finally healed, but it's the last component, because I was in one of the darkest places that a person can ever be. And nobody knew. And nobody knew because I was protecting my heart. I was protecting my kids. I was protecting my ex-husband. I was protecting everybody around me. I was protecting my career. And now more than anything, I crave honesty and transparency. In many ways, it's like a magnet right now, my heart to anybody who is being transparent with me. So I am trying my best to be transparent with you. So let me just take a second and explain the shit stick of life. Why did I name it the shit stick of life? Well, I already know there's, somebody out there right now going, "Well, I just wish she wouldn't have said shit." Well, newsflash, if that is a hard word for you to hear me say, you are going to be really disappointed in this podcast because I actually have a bit of a potty mouth. So if shit is really hard, fuck is going to be way harder. It's just going to be hard. They are, in fact, sentence enhancers that are not allowed, on HGTV programming. But make no mistake about it, I'm definitely saying them. They're just being cut from the show. I try to be respectful. I try to lead with my heart, but sometimes I throw shit in there. And I've lived in the South now for 27 years. So my girlfriends are, in fact, Southern. Some of them old school Southern, some of them redneck Southern, some of them hillbilly Southern. And they all know who they are. If they were in this room, they'd be like, "Yep, that one's me." But one of my friends, and I'm even going to call her out, her name's Teresa. She's grown up in Nashville her whole life. Laughs, I'm even saying it like Teresa. She can make hello or hi a 3-syllable word. Hi. Anytime something bad would happen to me, she'd say, "Oh, honey, you just been hit by that shit stick of life." And then it was like, "Oh, girl, you just been hit by the branch." And then she'd be like, "Well, fuck. A tornado picked up the whole damn trunk and hit you in the head, but you're going to survive." And that was how I got through it, recognizing that we all get hit by the shit stick of life. We can't escape it. That's the thing. And I'm now 45. That's the thing that I have learned is that whether you are a trust fund baby, and I know some of those, or whether you are on the top of Entoto Mountain in Ethiopia, and I've been there too, everyone has a story. And every story is relatable. We may not be able to go, oh, I identify with that very feeling, but the feeling of hopelessness is relatable. So here we are. I'm going to drink my tea out of my Mama Bear mug.
Well, you're having a reset here. I want to zero in on one thing you said there, if I may.
Yes, you may.
Expectation of public life, right? When you're a public personality, it's really interesting to actually behind the scenes be keeping everything to yourself.
Yes.
It's almost like you're not living authentically in your life,
you know it.
Right?
Yeah.
And especially women. So many women just think, oh, this is what I have to do to get through it. And they pile it on themselves.
Yeah. We were born and taught to keep it together. Mm-hmm. That was our role, right? We're shifting that role. I'm shifting that role for my daughter right now, right?
Yeah.
Like instead of calling her pretty, I call her smart. And instead of telling her to keep it all together, I say, hey, girl, let it go. Right? Yeah. So I'm shifting that as a mother. So you're absolutely correct.
And then also with the public profiles in social media, you know, a lot of women, especially on the Women in Media Network, talk about this life you see on Instagram or on TikTok, and then this life that is the real life. And the people who are connecting more with their audiences, like in a really authentic way, are the people who are sharing the shit stick stories. So you should be really proud of yourself and the journey that you're starting.
I appreciate that. I've done a lot of reflecting, and I think this is bringing me to my next point of why now. And we had a lot of things as a family that happened to us after the divorce. So the divorce was not fun, but we were able to get through it. And I sort of had this like glorified idea of what co-parenting could be and what post-divorce modern family could look like. That has been, stomped on and broken shattered into a million pieces. So that does not exist for our family. So first and foremost, I don't want to tell the pieces that are going to be so hurtful to people, but also I struggle because of this authenticity piece that we're talking about. It is my story. So one person might say to me, oh, you shouldn't be sharing that because, your kids were involved and that's, their dad, or those are their grandparents. Those are your siblings. And the other person is cheering me on. And that kind of sums up social media. I could post a picture of myself and somebody would say, wow, you look great. And somebody might say, wow, you do too much Botox. Or, why don't you dress up more? And the next person's like, she dresses up too much. It's a constant battle. So in my 40s, what I'm learning is that I actually don't give a shit what other people think. But really, the true answer is I do. I shouldn't give a shit what they think. And when I've been at my lowest low, or I'm having a bad day, and I get on social media and somebody is criticizing me, it is human nature to either attack or to retreat into a really bad place. Now, I have asked my children's permission to do this podcast. And some of you are going to not agree with that. Some of you are going to say, yay, Kortney. I don't care. This was my journey and my story. And I needed them to know that I was going to talk about hard things that, by the way, we've gotten through. We are on the other side. We have gone from surviving to thriving. And this is my story. I'm still in a healing process. Grief is a bitch. It rears its dirty little head from time to time and it hurts. And that's a part of everyone's story. There's no end game to happiness, right? There's just no end game. But I did go to each of them. And there's one in particular that I went to on 2 different occasions. He's my oldest because he was the most affected in an outward way. And as early as 2 months ago, I said, I'm really struggling with this decision. I can't sign the contract. I can't, talk about it. I can't make the dates. I can't make the meetings. And I've never been like this in my entire life. And I'm going to talk about some of these hard things. And he said, Mom, it's freedom of speech. It sounds like you already know what you need to do. And I burst into a million tears. because he knows this is not going to be easy on anybody. He also knows he doesn't have to listen to it, but he is also, on the other hand, contemplating whether he wants to be on the podcast, which is very interesting to me. So this child, who is a rock star, all my kids are so freaking cool, but this child who's been through it, gone through it, been hit, has done a lot of the good work himself. But I had to make some hard calls on his behalf. I had to do some really incredibly hard things. I mean, some of the hardest stuff a parent has to do, I had to do it. And he is thinking it over, mulling it over, whether he wants to do a podcast with me about it. And I will let him decide that. And I hope that he does, because Lord knows y'all will just die when you hear his story. But this will be his decision. So again, I keep coming back to this why now? Why now my kids are okay with it? Why now I've healed? But Sarah, you asked me before this started, was there, I can't remember how you phrased it, but was there
a moment?
A moment.
So what had been going on?
Mm-hmm.
Where were you? Tell me about that day that you were like, you know what? This story needs to be told on a podcast.
Yeah. Well, I had lived my life through a thumbnail. And we all, as a public figure, I have responsibilities. So people don't understand that when it comes to social media. So if I do a deal for a product, or I take on a show, everything is tied somewhat to social media, which means I have obligations to those things. It might be in the contract that I have to post on a certain day about something. And I had been in a fairly bitter battle in court that did not start as a custody battle. It actually started about sending one of our kids to school. That court day resulted in me getting an escort out of court. It was for my protection. Something had been said to a security guard, which resulted in them walking me out with walkie-talkies and tactile gear. I was scared. I didn't know what was going on at the time. Bear with me, y'all. Stick with me. I promise I will be laughing through other episodes. But if I'm going to be real with you, I'm going to tell you pieces of the story to help it make sense. So that was the beginning of many, 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 many times in court. One day I was sitting getting my hair done at a salon. And I had foils in my head. And my attorney texted me and said, "Hey, girl, check your email. We've just been served. You've just been served again. Call me to discuss. But I've sent everything to you in the email." So I opened the email and I read something it was the craziest accusation. It was untrue. I knew it was untrue, but I couldn't fathom the idea, like in writing on paper. And I was in fight or flight at this time. So I was just getting through each day trying to be a consistent parent. And now I'm going back to court to essentially defend this thing, which didn't happen. So I couldn't do it. Every person has a weight limit, and I had hit mine. So I made her take the foils out of my hair, and I washed my hair, and I got in a car, and I drove out about 40 minutes out of Nashville to a parking lot, and I wrote a letter because it was time for me to sleep and rest. I had never suffered from really crazy anxiety. I have a little bit of anxiety that keeps me going. It's healthy. I had never suffered from depression. I was always the dependable one. I am always the dependable one. And in this moment, I couldn't see straight. I just couldn't fathom the idea that I was going to go to court and hear words like this spoken. So I wrote letters to my kids. I wrote letters to the judge. And I explained the place that I was in and that basically I give up. But I couldn't do it. So I crawled into the backseat of the car and I fell asleep. I had turned my location preferences off on this, Life 360 and all the stuff, but I was linked to other things, other devices which were in the car. And so Ryan and a good friend of mine found me, and there was a knock at the window, and my sweet friend crawled in behind me and spooned me like a child and put her arms around me and said, "It's going to be okay." Now, this is the part that's really important. The next day I got on social media and I had one of those things I had to post for a company. I'm not going to say which company it was. I'm not going to say which product it was, but I had to do it. And some of the comments were ruthless. You think your life is so damn perfect. And I knew my life wasn't perfect. And I remember thinking, I am going to come back stronger. And I am going to show you. And I'm going to tell you just exactly the place that I'm in right now. And I'm going to inspire you to keep going and to not judge your neighbors. And we're all in this together, y'all. We're all in this together. You literally do not know what's going on in somebody else's life or behind closed doors. So 2 weeks later, we were in court and the judge put somebody on the stand and said, hey, so you think that this is happening? And this person said, yes. And the judge could see straight through it in a way that was comical. Like he laughed. And when he laughed and got to the point of the fact that this was not real, everyone else in the courtroom laughed. And I laughed. And I breathed this sigh of relief. And I thought, if I knew 2 weeks ago what was going to happen today and that he was going to laugh at this, I would have been fine. I would have taken a step forward in that moment. I wouldn't have gotten to that dark place. But I borrowed trouble. I went to the finish line that wasn't even the finish line. I had predetermined that I was not going to be able to live through it. I predetermined that I was not going to be able to get through another day. I predetermined that my weight limit was done and I was going to be crushed. And I decided all of that for myself instead of just taking a breath. So here I stand before you today as a really strong mom, strong entrepreneur, strong business person who still has bad days, but who knows better now. That the shit stick of life is going to come my way. It has, and it will again. But I can survive it. I can survive anything, and so can you. When I say this is just the tip of the iceberg, it is an understatement. I revealed secrets about my marriage. There was so much substance abuse. I don't know where to start. We're not going to go there. We're going to save that for another day. But I want you to be able to find the joy and the strength in the stories that we're going to tell to propel you forward. I don't want you to go, well, it's so much easier for them because I want you to look at this podcast as paving a way forward for yourself.
There's a word here. It's resilience. Because as hard as it was for you to conceptualize this podcast, you almost like felt called. You knew you had to do it. And it's because that other person driving to some parking lot needs to hear it.
Yes.
I think that's great that you're even telling us. I am going to share, even though I'm not ready to get into A, B, or C just yet.
I have been so scared. I would tell everyone exactly what happened. My truth is my truth. I don't, because I am so fearful of it hurting somebody else. You know, whether it's my kids, first and foremost, some of the story. Their dad, right? Their dad is still their dad. Though, you know, two of them are now 18 and 20. So they are adults in their own right. So they get to decide, you know, when and if they see either one of us for that matter. And then my daughter, who's 15, has not seen her dad in 3 years. So obviously there is a story behind this. I have not seen my parents in 5 years. My parents on my wedding day were with my ex-husband. On my new wedding day, guys, for those of you just joining, I have moved to Nashville. I got married, had a few kids, got divorced, and I'm remarried.
New husband is Ryan, just for anyone.
New husband is Ryan. We got married 1.5 years ago. We've been together for almost 4 years, 3.5 years, 4 years. I met him about 1.5 years after I got divorced. He was my first date after I got divorced.
Aw.
Yes, and he's pretty shy, so I can't imagine that he's going to want to make an appearance here, but he is behind the scenes and just amazing. And my kids have a great relationship with him. But I didn't have the traditional support in my divorce from my parents. they were not going to be able to support both of us at the same time because of the circumstance. I wish them well. I love them, and I love my siblings, but Dr. Phil used to always say, when you say but, it means don't listen to anything I just said now. I'm going to tell you the truth. I didn't mean to say but. I do love everyone. I just had to cut some ties with people to keep my sanity, and to support my kids and to make really hard decisions that needed to be made. So we're on the other side of it, and I really want to tell some more of that story as we go on, because it's what a triumph now to be where my oldest son calls me once or twice a day and even says things like, Mom, I need your advice. Or, hey, I missed you guys so much. It's Thanksgiving and I'm working. Can I call you a bunch of times today? And I'm like, yeah, you can call us every, hour on the hour. And then he did. In the same way that I've learned a lot about myself as a parent. This is, it didn't come with a rule book. I made mistakes. And I want to talk about that too, because I don't want anybody else to feel shame over the mistakes they're making, because I made them and I'm going to continue to make them. That's just being human, being a mom, being a parent. But I am on the other side of it. And I did get hit by the shit stick of life. And I do have wonderful friends who I consider my family, my chosen family, who have supported me, who, many of those people walked me down the aisle. I had, I think, 8 girlfriends walk me down the aisle to my Ryan. I collected them as I went down the aisle, and then they all gave me away. So I have a beautiful story, but I'm here because I took a step forward. I'm here because I went straight through the pain like an arrow, felt every bit of it. I cried in bathtubs. I sobbed at, different times of the day, in the middle of the day, and then got on a meeting or got on a story and, said my happy piece or sold my sweater or, whatever it was, right? Because I also have to make a living. So those things aren't not real either. They are real. I am happy most of the time. Guys, I think this is going to bring us to the end of this episode.
We do have to talk about guests for a moment.
Okay. Well, my vision is that I want people to share their shit stick of life stories if they've gotten to the other side. That piece is really important. This is meant to inspire people. That can mean an author or a celebrity, but it can also mean you out there. So if you have an extraordinary story to tell, Sarah, where are we going to have the links?
We call it show notes in podcasts.
Show notes. Oh, I'm learning something today. Show notes. So at the end of every episode, you can find all of this information in our show notes. I listen to enough podcasts to know that you got to like and you got to share and you got to what?
Follow, subscribe.
Subscribe and follow. So please do all the things. I promise you I'll get better. But it's really important if you know somebody that has an extraordinary story in any category, tell us about it. We want to hear about it because we want to share it with you. And when I was looking for this piece of the puzzle, whether I was, driving to work or driving to set or driving my kids back and forth like a chauffeur, I found it very hard to find podcasts that just told these beautiful stories. It was very celebrity driven and very pop culture driven. So I really want this to be about you telling your stories. Please share them with me. Thank you all for bearing with me on my first episode and listening to the Shit Stick of Life podcast. I appreciate you all. I love you all. Cheers.